Hi, Bread of Life. Thank you for coming to the second session of the Missions Retreat. We're discussing gifts of the Asian American Church, and my thesis is that our weaknesses, our cultural weaknesses, our even interpersonal weaknesses, the ones that we own ourselves, are actually God's gift to us. That in our weaknesses that we can boast, God will demonstrate his strength, demonstrate his power, and redeem our weaknesses so that we can be blessed, and then we can be a blessing to others. And in that way, we could do ministry and missions and care for others. Today, the gifts of the Asian American Church that I want to share tonight are the generation gaps that we face in our Asian American families, and then related to God's Panda family. The passage we're going to read is from the book of Romans, and it says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the flesh to live according to it. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if you, by the Spirit, you put to the death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. For those who are led by the Spirit are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to the sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are God's children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory." This is the word of the Lord. So let me start with the scariest day of my life. It was actually the time when we began to become foster parents to our two foster daughters. And we had gotten the message that we were going to get these two teenage girls. They were refugees from Burma. But we only had 2 weeks to prepare. We had a 2 weeks pregnancy. And so we were sort of stunned by the news that we were going to receive these two sisters. And our first thought was fear. Who are these people? And we had stranger danger, right? Could they be axe murderers? Who knows who these strangers are coming into our house and becoming part of our family? And who knows what kind of kids they were? They could have been needy, spoiled brats. I wasn't used to having any girls. We had a 5-6-year-old son at the time. So who knows how teenage girls may act? Who knows how emotional they may be? Who knows if they're, again, needy, and I didn't want to deal with any neediness. And then finally, it's sort of scary because what does it say about us if we turn out to be lousy parents? What if we're overbearing, frustrated parents? What if after the training, we're not really helpful to these young women? And so we had 2 weeks to prepare. We spent a lot of time gathering the things that they need for their home. We had to do the things for foster care, like hide knives and put on locks in the medicine cabinet and put away poisons. And so we were so busy. And then we realized the day before they came, we have no idea what to do about raising teenage daughters. So we did the thing that any Asian parent would do. We went to the bookstore and got books on how to raise your teenage daughter a day before we got 2 teenage daughters. And we're quickly reading all the books we could and trying to think, what are the boundaries are we going to set? What are the rules are we going to do? What if they bring in boyfriends at home? And suffice to say, it was terrifying. And the reason it was so terrifying was that because for us as Asian parents, family is everything. And we put so much love and effort into raising our son, and we wanted to put that same amount of love and effort and care towards our daughters that were going to be new. We have a lot of hopes and dreams for our son, and we wanted to have the same high hopes and dreams for our daughters. We knew that we were pained and hurt when our own son was sick or injured, and we knew that we were going to become emotionally interconnected with our daughters, so that their pain became our pain. We know as Asians that how they turn out aren't just reflections of our lives, but actually extensions of our lives. There's a different kind of boundaries for Asian parents. We're not just, again, children aren't just reflections of the parents, but they're actually extensions. So if they turn out badly, then it's because an extension of us, we were bad parents. And maybe we shouldn't put so much weight on how we parent and our role, but we do. And so bringing in people into your family, it is a scary venture. Bringing people up who are younger and raising them into adults is a scary, nerve-wracking endeavor. And so those were the scariest days of my life. Now, in the scriptures, it talks about how in Romans, we have an obligation. And in Asian families, we also have a lot of obligations. You can't see the picture here, but I just wrote a book called Family Sacrifices, and it talks about second-generation Chinese Americans. And the title, Family Sacrifices, sort of encapsulates the kind of love and concern that the second generation have for their elders and for the children that they're going to have. A lot of times, even for non-Christian Asian Americans, their family becomes the most important thing. It becomes sort of like their religion. It's the way they make sense of life. It becomes their primary identity. If I'm a brother or a father of someone, it becomes their ethical way of relating. I have to take care of you. You have to take care of me. So we have this strong sense of obligations. And again, in the Western sense, obligations are burdensome. The responsibilities are not made of our own free will. But in the Asian family, these obligations are assumed. These obligations aren't burdens, but they're just the expected ways of being. So let me sort of quickly go over how some Asian families operate, especially the ones that are hierarchical, that are more traditional, perhaps. They have clear family roles. So you think, well, who has the power? Who makes the decision? And it's usually the parents. When you think about who's the older, wiser ones, it's usually the grandparents. If you think about the children, who's the responsible one? It's usually the eldest. Who's the free-spirited one? It's the youngest. Who's the mixed up one? It's the middle child. My sister was the middle child. So we all have clear family roles. And given our role, we have clear, strict responsibilities. And they're very strict, so that if you don't do them, then you're shamed, you can be punished, you can be, even at the worst case scenario, cast out of the family, which is the worst thing. So the strict responsibilities in general are filial piety, that you're bound to the family, you think of family first, even before your own desires and interests, that if the family needs something, you're there for the family. If you're the oldest, you take care of the youngest. If you're younger, you obey and respect the elder. These are age-related power dynamics. And so again, the older you are, the more power and status you gain. And the younger you are, the less power and status you have. And so we have these family obligations, and then we also include immigrant logics. So the obligation is that the children should listen and respect to their elders. And if you have an immigrant parent, the immigrant logic is that, wow, the parent came all the way from Asia to the United States for the sake of the children, for the sake of the children's education. And so it's only logical then that the children should respond to that huge sacrifice that the parents made and give back to the parents. That's what we found in family sacrifices. The second generation eventually realized, wow, their grandparents and parents made so many sacrifices for them, and they in turn feel responsible to give back, to reciprocate the love in the form of sacrifice to their parents. And usually the way they demonstrate their love to their elders is to work hard, to study hard, to have good careers so that they could take care of the elders who took such good care of them. So I hope that makes sense to you. Now, given this sort of general pattern, because it's hierarchical, you also have hierarchical communications. You have some people who have power and authority, and you have those younger who listen. And then the communication pattern is one of Tinghua. It literally means becoming, stop your speech and listen, become listening centered. And so I don't know if you've heard it so much, but a lot of young people are told in Chinese families to Tinghua, to listen first before you speak out. And so that's why a lot of times kids are quiet around their kids. And then good kids are those who are so quiet. So I remember my son met some other strangers who were Chinese, and he said, "Oh, your son's so good." And I looked at him, I go, "He's not doing anything." And I go, "Yeah, that's why he's so good, because he's just quiet and doing nothing." Part of the values behind Tinghua is that you want to show respect for your authorities. You learn to listen first. You seek their wisdom before asserting your own ignorance. And if you do assert your ignorance, if you do speak out, you're sort of shaming yourself. And again, you're not only shaming yourself, you're shaming your entire family. If you speak out rashly, if you display arrogance or pride, those are all negative ways of self-presenting. Instead, if you Tinghua, you maintain harmony. And I think more and more in the US, we're taught to be so free and to express ourselves. But when you express your emotion and they're negative, that really drags down the whole group. If someone's grumpy in your midst, that grumpiness sort of brings down everybody. If someone's angry, then everyone's sort of walking on eggshells. And so to be able to control your emotions, to Tinghua and to learn to listen and to not speak, and especially not speak in aggravated, harsh tones, that maintains harmony so that people don't have to walk on eggshells, so that people don't become grumpy because you're grumpy. That's part of understanding that there are group dynamics, that we actually feel each other's feelings. And so to maintain harmony, we Tinghua, we tread softly. Again, it's not being quiet for the sake of being quiet. But again, what we're trying to do as Chinese people is that we're trying to be modest by not saying much. And that modesty is a reflection of your inner humility. And humility is a high, high value in the Chinese community. Here's a quote: "Be like the bamboo. The higher you grow, the deeper you bow," right? And so humility is, again, walking like a child before the elder. It's keeping your head down, being respectful, and displaying a learning posture, a posture of wanting to respect the elder, to learn from the wisdom of the elder, and to honor, especially, the elder. So Tinghua, again, is the outward expression of an inward humility. And again, humility is also a Christian virtue. So again, the Chinese cultural values line up, I think, well with the Christian values. So you have a general pattern that Asian families are hierarchical, and so in the family household, the adults are the ones who speak, who order kids around, and the kids learn to listen and be quiet. That leads to the authoritarian parent. And this is like the tiger parent. And this authoritarian parent is a style of child rearing that really expects a lot from the kids, right? You have high standards. You're authoritarian. You're the authority. You have high standards that you expect the kids to meet. And if they don't meet it, then you shame them. You say, "Why can't you be like your cousins?" You compare, and you tell them, "Why can't you," especially in comparison to a high standard, the kid gets shamed because he looks outward and says, "Wow, I don't meet the standard that my parents have set for me." Authoritarian parents also may withdraw love. And one of the ways that they do it is through passive aggressive dismissal. So you could tell a Chinese parent may be angry because they're not saying anything. And that's sort of a withdrawal. It's passive aggressive, and they're walking around trying to hold in their anger, not expressing it, but they're angry. So that's the authoritarian parent. They have really high expectations. Again, the ranch 99 expectation, you should be getting 100. But as you shame and withdraw your love and hold high expectation, kids then develop really low self-esteem because they can never live up to the high standards of their parents. They become aggressive and rebellious because not being able to live up to the high standards, they just give up and they rebel. Or if they do follow through and always live up to the expectations of the harsh parent, they're unable to think on their own because they're always listening. They're cowed into always obeying. And so they can't think for themselves. They don't have any will. They actually get what we call learned helplessness. They learn over time. There's no use trying to talk back. There's no use trying to assert their own will because they'll get beaten down. And that learned helplessness then carries over into other areas of life where they feel like the victim, where they feel like they can't do anything. So that's maybe one of the dangers of having an Asian household. You have these harsh tiger parents who expect a lot, and they hold those expectations by shaming you, by comparing you consistently. That leads into the unseen, unheard child. And so that's actually sort of my problem. A lot of times with such a focus on outward accomplishments, again, what you do, like the rich young ruler, you don't feel seen for who you are on the inside as a child. And I know a lot of Chinese and a lot of Asian American kids feel unseen, especially by their parents. Their parents expect outward good behaviors, but the parents don't see the inside heart of the children. They don't see the feelings of the children. They don't really pay attention to the heart of the child. Without a voice, because they're taught to Tinghua, they may not learn how to speak up. And when they do speak up, they just yell back at the parents. They yell back angrily. And without a voice, they may not feel heard because you may say something and it doesn't matter what you say, the family's going to do what the parents say. So I have all of these problems, embarrassingly. I don't know. I speak up a lot, but the way I speak up is that I yell. I'm really loud because I feel like I'm not getting heard. I remember I'm the youngest child, and so I never got my way, it seemed like. Or I remember we would play games and I would always lose because I'm the youngest. And so the one time I got a Christmas gift, the game, I wrote on it, Sandy can't play this game. It's mine. Ha, ha, ha. Because my sister would always beat me at games. And so I would just wanted to rebel and have my own game. A lot of kids become quiet, shrinking violets. In fact, they don't want to be seen because if they are seen, they're going to get beaten down. They're going to get yelled at. And sometimes I'm like that. I'd rather be under the radar doing my own thing without any authorities watching me. Because if authorities do see me, that means probably I'm going to get into trouble. I'm never going to get praised. So why bother being seen by the authorities? And so as the youngest child in a hierarchical family, I never really did learn how to speak up well. When I tried to assert my way, I had to yell and scream. And most of the time, though, even if I yelled and screamed, I was just being a little kid having a temper tantrum, I won't get heard. So I'm screaming and I'm not heard because who listens to a kid having a temper tantrum? Or I may want to do things, but because I'm the youngest, I couldn't make the decisions. And so my older siblings got to do what they wanted to do. My parents got to do what they wanted to do. And I just had to go along for the ride. Now, in contrast to the authoritarian Chinese family with the tiger parents, the sort of opposite extreme are the permissive parents. And focus on the family, a Christian evangelical parenting model is sort of not fully like this, but some of the ways they teach are very permissive. For example, they argue that the primary job of the dad isn't to be the leader or the authority or the teach wisdom to the kids, but rather the dad's primary underlying job isn't control, it's to validate every one of his child. That means to let your kid know over and over again that through words and actions of the following are true. Hey, you exist and you matter to me. Has any Chinese dad come up to his kid and just sort of randomly said, hey, I see you, you matter to me, you're good enough, you're an okay kid? And that's the job of the dad, is just constantly affirming the child. I never got that. I just got, you got an A minus, what's wrong with you? Why can't, And so in contrast to the Asian tiger mom that expects high expectations and regularly criticizes the kid, the permissive parent, his primary job is to affirm, validate the kid, to give them a good self-esteem. That leads, of course, to the narcissistic kid. Whereas the tiger kid may feel voiceless and unseen, the kid of the permissive parent becomes narcissistic. And you could see that in every Disney movie, that the adolescent is always staring at themselves, wondering who they are. Will I show who I am on the inside? And so they're always looking at themselves because their parents are permissive, always validating them. The whole world's affirming them. Everybody's telling them they're a good kid, they matter, I see you, you're affirmed. And so they become sort of self-focused. They become spoiled brats sometimes. And that's the danger of the other extreme. So you could see you have sometimes authoritarian parents who don't show much worth, have clear rules, are emotionally distant and more punishment oriented. And that's how often the tiger mom is expressed. And they tell you to practice piano and you ask why, and they say, because I said so. In contrast, you have the white evangelical permissive parent who's always affirming, who avoids confrontation and says, you're the boss, you're great. Whatever you do, oh, wow, I love that drawing, good job. Now, for me, again, just to give you a little bit about my own experience as an Asian, and maybe it relates to you, I eventually, growing up in that time of environment, I sort of lived by the flesh. And what I'm going to mean by that is I'm sort of enslaved to my emotional state. And I haven't really grown up. I'm enslaved to it because I act like the 5-year-old kid who was the youngest child who has never heard. So emotional intelligence involves being aware of how you feel and then regulating. So if you have a negative feeling, you're able to be, oh, I'm feeling a little upset by what that person said. But rather than reacting strongly, you're able to say, okay, I better calm down. You think about what you want to do, your motivation. You think about the other person, and you develop social skills to say what you want to say, but understanding how the other person is going to receive it. That's a good way of, if someone hurts you or if someone yells at you, the best way is to understand, oh, I'm feeling a little hurt. I want them to stop it, but I know that person is angry and that's why they yelled. So I'm going to express to him, oh, the way you said something really hurt me, but, and I could understand why you're upset, but can you not say it that way? So that would be an emotionally intelligent way to respond to someone. Now, instead, what I do and the way I'm enslaved, and this is terrible because I get rebuked again and again for being unbearably harsh and critical. Okay, so let me explain to you how I act. I have a trigger. It's a situation usually in like stressful situations, maybe where you have little time, you have to make a quick decision, and there's a lot of stress and pressure. And maybe I'm expecting some, let's say I'm the leader, and so I have even more stress because I have responsibility. That's the trigger. And people go into fight mode. They yell back and they get angry and they try to get their way, exert their power. They could go into flight mode where they just sort of avoid and withdraw and don't care about the dynamics of a room, or they freeze and they just don't say anything. They withdraw within themselves. So you get stressed and your feeling, your emotional response is a feeling, And then usually you act out in the culturally prescribed way that you learned how to deal with that feeling, right? So if you're feeling angry and the people you were raised, when you feel anger, people yell, then you sort of yell because that's what's modeled to you. That's what happened to me and my family. Some people, they feel upset, but nobody in their family showed any emotion. So you don't even know you're feeling angry because it was never interpreted for you, that feeling, as anger. So you don't feel anger, you just feel upset, but you don't know that it's anger. And so you act out the way other people do. You may, again, go on, disassociate, just flee the situation. So what I do is a lot of times I feel unheard. I'm an authority, but maybe someone disagrees with me and they ignore what I had just said. That really triggers me. Again, because I'm the youngest child, I feel unheard. All the memories of being unheard come back to me. And I started acting the same way that I did when I'm a 5-year-old little boy who wasn't heard. And I began to fight back. And maybe I interpret this feeling as I should just critique, I can speak in a harsh, haughty manner. And that's the way my family acted. That's why I think a lot of people in the Cantonese community speak. They're very critical. They say what's on their mind, especially if you're the authority. And then you notice what's wrong with people. And so I come off as a critical, harsh person. And partially it's because that's my family background. Partially it's because I interpret a lot of things as being unheard, and I interpret things in a frustrating way, and I act out of my impulse. So in fact, twice this week, I've been rebuked for being critical and harsh, so that the impact on the others was that they were hurt, they were shamed, and they were cowed. That means they were fearful of me because I was exerting authority in a harsh way. So much so that I'll tell you later what's happened. Now, what we need to do is to receive the Spirit, to put to death our fleshly emotional responses, the way we were raised in our Asian family, perhaps, and instead not go by the slavery to our emotions, to our bodies, to our reactions, the things that made us slaves, that made us fearful and to act in fear. But instead, what we need to do is to be led by the Spirit. Now, I'm going to give you a different way of operating using my own situation. I'm triggered, someone doesn't hear me. I'm in a position of authority, yet they still don't hear me. And we got to make a decision really quickly. I then get triggered. I feel threatened. And then I'm also, again, reminded of myself as a little boy, a 5-year-old. And again, I go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. I tend to fight back and speak out more harshly and hauntingly. Some of you may be quiet and you go into your non-executive function mode and you act out. And that's all problematic because, again, I become critical and harsh. Now, you can go into flight mode in a threat. You can go to fight mode in a threat. You could freeze and withdraw in a threat. But there's a fourth response. Animals flock together in a threatening situation. And that's what we should do, I think, as Christians. Rather than fighting when we're upset, rather than fleeing and withdrawing when we're upset, we need to learn to flock to the Father, go to the Spirit. Let the Spirit address your emotions, address your bodily response so that you become aware, wow, I am upset. To reflect and pray to God, God, take my feelings right now. And rather than taking your feelings, interpreting them as anger and your sense of being right and expressing how right you are, you and then instead being led by the Spirit, by the wisdom of the Spirit, decide how can I respond better in an empathetic and a thoughtful way. So this is really hard to do, you could see, to change the patterns that you've had in your family, to change your own personality, to change the way you've been enslaved to the flesh. And I know that that's my weakness. I'm stuck in this sort of communication pattern. I'm stuck in this emotional response. And I need to instead, when I'm triggered, to believe God the Father actually hears me. The Spirit can actually change how I feel and fill me up. And the more I could let God speak to me and let his love transform me, the more I could let the Spirit redeem me, then maybe I could respond better. It'll be a fruit of the Spirit if I could become loving and gentle, patient and persevering. Of course, I'm far from it. So I think, as I said, the Asian American family leads to a lot of shaming, sometimes leads to a lot of self-worthlessness because we may not get the affirmation we expect, could lead to an angry response in situations because anger is the only thing we've seen modeled in our family. It could lead to a Tinghua quiet nature where we can't speak our own mind because we never learned to speak our own mind. So in some ways, being Chinese is really weak, especially in this Western society where you're taught to be emotionally expressive, where you're supposed to be assertive and talkative, where you're supposed to be a leader who speaks his or her mind and is aggressive. And so we have these competing cultural demands, and we have these competing parental expectations, and we have these competing family dynamics. And so I know Chinese Americans feel like they act one way in their Chinese family, and then they have to totally shift roles when they go to school or when they go into the workplace. In fact, Asian Americans, again, are the ones who feel racial group most uncomfortable in the workplace, who feel like they can't be at home in the workplace because the communication style, the expressive style, the group dynamics are so different. But I think there are two strengths to the Chinese American family that I want to highlight that we can receive from the Chinese family or the Asian family, and that we could use to bless others. And the first is that gift in that hierarchical situation. In America, everybody's equal. Everyone's on the level playing field. People call everybody by the first names. But in a Chinese and maybe an Asian American household, you do have a little bit more respect. We're not equal. You have more respect and reverence for elders. You call people auntie and uncle. You lower your head when you see an older person. You know that you're supposed to obey authorities. And actually, that translates, I think, into a very worshipful attitude that we may have that others may not get. Great is the Lord and worthy of praise. He's to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. I'm in awe of God. I fear God. Coming from an Asian background, I've learned that hierarchical notion that some people are more wise than us. Some people are more authoritative than us. Some people are more powerful than us. Some other people are way more holy than us. And for me, maybe the distance between me and God is far and wide. And that's actually a good thing because then I'm afraid of God. I'm afraid of God's judgment. I'm afraid of God's holiness. It's like a lot of the Old Testament prophets who say, were fearful when God came to them and didn't want to be seen by God. They know their sinfulness. They know their lowliness, especially in relationship to God. So I think that may be being lost, and especially in America, the sense of reverence and respect for God. So retain that as part of your Chinese heritage. Retain that as a way to view God, especially as we go into worship times. Some people take worship more casually now. They think you can come as you are. You can look at your phone all the time. But for me, no, we're coming before the God who made heavens, our creator, the one who took us out from dust and breathed life into us. When you go before your maker, it's like a little toy before the sculpture or the toy maker. It's like Pinocchio and whoever his dad's name is. And so hold on to that sense of respect and reverence. Bring it into the church. Fear God the way he deserves to be feared. Awe God. Be in awe of God for his holiness. And treat Sabbath and worship as a time where we enter sacred space. Think of the community as a place of wonder. That it's when we go before God, and this is how I feel. When we go before God, we come before a burning fire, and we have to take off our sandals and bow because we're on holy ground. And I hope we could retain that reverence every Sunday because God deserves it. Just the way our grandparents deserve our respect, the way our ancestors gave everything so that we could live in the same way God the Father created us, the Spirit leads us, and Jesus died for us. The other strength of the Chinese family that I believe is that we have this hesed, loyal love. Hesed means God's faithfulness and his love demonstrated by his faithfulness and loyalty to us. We've received adoption to sonship. And my foster daughters, when they were orphans, they talked about how small they felt, how powerless they felt, how alone they felt. They were migrants who moved to Malaysia, and then when they were teenagers, their parents passed away, and so they were left in a brand new country where they didn't speak the language, where they didn't have the right documents, and so they were really scared. They were really fearful, and even when they saw police, they were concerned because the police, knowing that they didn't have documents, they wouldn't arrest them and put them in jail. They would actually sell them and traffic them. And so my foster daughters, when they came into our family, they felt a real sense of safety. They were able to just breathe and relax. They were able to come home to a family that wouldn't let them go, no matter what they did. And that's like the Father's hesed, loyal love. Time and time again, if you read scriptures, it's, for me, mostly a story of God's character, of that. If you read all of the Old Testament, Israel fails and fails and fails. Israel becomes idolatrous and prostitutes itself and chases after other gods. But God the Father always brings them back. His compassions are new every morning. He's consistent. And no matter what we do, he's going to be consistent and always love us. And you know what? I think that loyal love is really demonstrated in a lot of Asian families. I know that, for example, with my wife and I, again, I'm really overbearing. I have this harsh, critical tone, and she doesn't feel affirmed by me. And even though I'm constantly criticizing her and it's really hard to live with me, she sticks with me. She just assumes we're family together. We're husband and wife together. It's not a transactional thing that if you don't become a better husband, I get to break off with you because you're not doing your part of the bargain. It's not an exchange. It's an assumption that we're going to be together through thick and thin. And so even though you're critical and overbearing, I'm going to stick with you through this so that we can grow together. And so that's why we can grow. And that's why it's helping me become less critical and less harsh, because I know that I am slowly being heard by someone, that I won't be abandoned by someone. And even tonight, as I said, I've been rebuked by a lot of church people and members, and I'm actually a church council member. I actually had to go to the rest of the church council, and they actually held me accountable for how critical and harsh and authoritarian I've been And in fact, it even became hurting other people, abusive, and it became a pattern. And so they had to talk to me about it. And I think that's just an act of love, that they could care enough for me that they would rebuke me in a good way, but say, Russell, because you're part of the church, because you're leadership, we want to hold this out to you because we know you can do better. And while you're still harsh and critical, we're going to stick with you, but we want you to become better. That's that loyal love that I felt really cared for, because they saw my weakness, my feeling of smallness and being unheard. They saw me act out like a 5-year-old holding a temper tantrum time and time again. Yet they were like the parent who always fed me. They were like the parent who disciplined me, loved me enough to say, you shouldn't act like this. Quit acting like a little 5-year-old. We expect more of you. And so I'm really grateful for a family that holds me accountable, but does it in a loving way. But the good news is that God is like a Chinese family in that he has high expectations, that he's always going to be loyal, but he's also intimate. And by him, we can cry through the Spirit, Abba, Father. We could actually connect, even though God is so much more above us, even though he is to be feared. God is also the Father who holds us in the palm of his hand. And the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. The Spirit testifies, even though I may feel invisible and never recognized, even though I may feel unheard and no one ever listens to me as the youngest child, the Spirit testifies that we are seen and heard as God's children. So, Bread of Life, please know God the Father wants intimacy with you as well. He is to be feared, but at the same time, he's the God who draws near to you. He's the God who feeds you when you're sick. He's the God who washes you when you need to be cleaned. And he doesn't do it from afar, but he feeds you close up. He washes you, scrubbing you by hand. And I know that every time I feel ashamed, when I feel ashamed, I just want to, again, become invisible, to disappear. But God even finds me. I'm a little sheep who's trying to hide. He finds me and he brings me back to the flock. And even now, when I'm get emotionally upset, when I am critical and harsh, I know that God is still holding me, still soothing me, still listening to me, and still caring for me. So we have an amazing Father, one who is worthy to be feared, but one who holds us in his hand. And finally, as we're brought into God's family, as he adopts us as his children, as he becomes that intimate Abba Father to us, he also gives us an inheritance. Not only are we his children, but we're his heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if we indeed share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. So I don't know if you think about being an heir and that status very often, but I lived with my grandmother, and my grandmother didn't have much. She never really worked because she didn't speak English, and she was often sick. And so she just stayed in our house. And when she passed away, again, she had nothing to give to others. But she actually did leave me one thing. It was this little clown who was a bank, and in it were all these coins that she saved up. But these weren't just regular coins. They were mint condition coins from the 1940s and 50s, pure silver, pure copper, that she held for decades and then gave them to me. So I was the inheritor of my grandmother's savings in this little clown. And it turns out decades later that these coins, the few change that she saved, actually became worth a lot because of the purity of the metals inside. And more than actually the actual amount of money that I received from her, what this clown represents is her love and thoughtfulness for me, that she would always was sort of future oriented, not thinking about herself, but thinking about my welfare, my health, and then my future. It's the family sacrifices that she gave up a lot of her life so that she could give to my mother and then to me. And so in the same way, we're heirs, the riches of heaven, but more than all the honor and riches that we're going to receive, the status we're going to get as his children. For me, it's the thoughtfulness of the Father to think of us so well that he adopted people from outside his family and said, no, I'm thinking of you. You're one of my own. You bear my name. You bear my identity. And I see you and I care for you. So, Bread of Life, know that a lot like Chinese families who always think about the future and the future generations, in the same way God thinks of you, saw you even before you were born, gave up his own life for you before you were born to give you an inheritance. And that inheritance of being his heirs means that he was thinking of us and that he was caring for us even from the start. So we have a panda father, not a tiger mom, not a teddy bear dad, but a panda father, a father for everyone because he's white, black, and Asian. And our panda father is the one who adopts, who brings everybody into his family. The panda father is one who is authoritative in that he has high expectations. He's a holy God to be feared. He's our maker. He takes care of us. He protects us. He's a God we could rest in because he has all power. But he is also the high nurturing father, one who's always responsive, always willing to talk to us and hear us out, one who gives power to us and instead of lording over us, makes us his heirs. So Bread of Life, receive the gift of the Panda Father, one who sees you, one who hears you, one who frees us from our fleshly emotions and responses, and one who brings us into his own fold, always wanting our best and giving us his kingdom. Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for our Chinese families, for the high expectations that they have, for the sacrifices they've given us, for the forms of love in physical care and in the sacrifices of immigration. And we thank you that we could have a Father, a God whom we can fear, a God who has created us, yet also a Father for whom we could say, Abba, Father, Daddy. And like me, as a 5-year-old boy who feels unheard and unseen, you instead see me and you hear me, and you hold me in your hands and make me your heir. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.